Hi everyone, today I'm here to talk about why the mean is not enough. Many companies and businesses usually look at the mean as their metric of measurement. If you go to many companies, you see things like average order value, spend per customer, unit per transaction, average daily balance. You look at all of these things that are actually averages, and sometimes you realize that they don't actually give you a lot of information to understand what is really happening. And today I'm here to talk about that. But first, let me give credit to these people, because I can understand why it's easy to measure the mean. Number one, it's very simple, and business leaders really want metrics that are simple. Number two is that the mean is easier to compute. In fact, most analytical softwares can easily compute the mean out of the box, but other measures that I will talk about might be harder to compute. So is one of the reasons why the mean is much popular. But we know that the mean cannot give you detailed insight about what is happening in your data for you to really look for optimization opportunities. Okay, so what are some of the reasons why the mean is not enough? Number one, the mean is impacted heavily by outliers. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say you want to understand the average income, or you just want to understand actually the income of people in Akron, Ohio, okay, where I went to school, and you select maybe a sample of 1,000 people in Akron, Ohio, and somehow you ended up selecting LeBron James. Okay, LeBron James is a basketball player. I say he's the best player of all time, but that's for another time to debate. Now, LeBron James is earning about 127 million a year. So if you have LeBron James in your sample, and then you have other 999 people in your sample that are earning about 100,000, 50,000, you compute your average, and you are actually having so much high number, and you'll be wondering, oh wow, the people in Akron are earning a lot. But guess what? This is because you selected LeBron James in your sample, and LeBron James is an outlier. Okay, and he's from Akron, so it's legitimate that you select LeBron. But you can clearly see the reason why the average is not good in certain situations. It is heavily influenced by outliers. Okay, number two is that the average is actually inadequate in telling you about the data distribution, right? If you just compute the average and you report the average to your business stakeholders, they may not know the minimum thing in the data or the maximum thing in the data. Okay, let me give you another interesting example. One of the things that a particular retailer that I work for look at is unit per transaction, and there was a time where the unit per transaction for a particular week was so much high, and everybody was like, okay, what might be happening? And when I look into the data and I look at the maximum unit per transaction, there was a person that was buying over 2,000 units of a particular product on the same day. And guess what? This person was a reseller. He was buying this to go and resell somewhere. And this doesn't happen a lot, but if you look at the data and look at the maximum, you see that, okay, he had the maximum units bought in that particular weekend. And guess what? The average doesn't reveal that. It only shows up in the number, and people will be wondering, why is this number up in this particular week? That's another reason why the mean or the average is not always enough. Okay, another reason is that the mean actually oversimplifies. It looks at the data, give you one metric about it, and that's it. But sometimes as data scientists, you want to look for more opportunities to understand the data, to really find ways to optimize whatever metric you are looking to optimize. Another reason why the mean is not enough is that it doesn't really represent well the variability in your data. Basically, the variability in your data is lost when you are dealing with the mean. Let me give you an example. So assuming that you have, let's say you sell mobile phones, and in a particular day you sold 3 phones. One was $90, the other one was $159, and then the third one was $700. Okay, and the average was $316 for that day. But on another day, you actually sold 3 other phones, okay, and one of them was $340, another was $318, and then the last one was $291. The average again is $316. So these 2 different samples give you $316. But you can see that in the first one, there's a lot of variability, ranging from $90 to $700. Whereas in the second one, it only ranges from $291 to $340. So you can clearly see, that if you just report on the average, it doesn't really give you a lot of information. There's lots of information on the variability. So this is another reason why the mean is not always enough. So what should we look at instead? So the first thing I recommend, in addition to the mean, is really looking at what I call the 5-number summary. In fact, this is really represented in a box plot. This gives you really an information on the entire distribution of the data. Okay, let's take a look at the box plot and see what it actually is. So here's the box plot. And you can see that the box plot actually shows you information on your minimum and your maximum. So these are the 2 edges, the 2 edges of your data. Okay, then it tells you, your 25th percentile, or what we call the first quartile, and then your 75th percentile, which is called the third quarter, or Q3. And then in the middle you have the median. So you can see that you, in addition to the minimum and the maximum that gives you the range, you also have the interquartile range, which is basically the third quartile minus the first quartile, and then you have the median, or the second quartile, in the middle. Okay, in fact, just looking at this diagram, you can clearly see the distribution of your data. You clearly see what is the highest number, what is the lowest number. For example, the Q1 25th percentile gives you the number at which about 25% of your data is below or at that number. So for example, if your first quartile is $100, and in your sales data, then it means that 25% of your population is spending $100 or less. Okay, so basically the box plot, or the 5-number summary, gives you a good representation of the data distribution. And it's very important that in addition to the mean, you look at the 5-number summary. Okay, the second thing I would recommend that you look at when understanding your data, in addition to the mean, is just plot out the histogram. The histogram actually gives you the distribution of your data in a nice and easily digestible shape. Okay, just take a look at this. You can see 3 types of histogram here. One of them is basically what we call a unimodal histogram. So there is really one distribution in your data. Okay, the other one is bimodal. So you can see that in this data, there are different modes in your data. You wouldn't see this just by measuring average. And the third one is like a multimodal histogram, where you have different peaks in your data. You cannot actually understand this if you just actually use the mean. And in a multimodal one, maybe there are some customer segments, or there's some business segments that's actually leading to that multimodal distribution. And so really plotting the histogram and using that to understand your data is actually very important, in addition to the mean. Okay, now let me actually show you some other example of a histogram that is actually going to help us understand a few more things. Now look at these 3 histograms here. You can see one is skewed to the left, and one is what we call a symmetric distribution, and then one is actually skewed to the right. Okay, you can clearly see that if the data is symmetric, usually the average or the arithmetic mean is a good measure. It can represent data fairly well, but even that, there are some pockets of data that you want to go beyond the mean. Okay, now if the data is skewed to the right, you can clearly see that it's not really going to tell you a lot if you just measure the mean. The same way if you skewed to the left, right? But again, the histogram is important because it just lets you actually see the distribution of the data, and so there is nothing to really worry about because you clearly understand the data, right? Another measure that helps a lot is the standard deviation. So in addition to the mean, you can actually calculate the standard deviation, which is really a measure of spread. It lets you understand how spread the actual values are from the center, which is the mean, okay, in most cases. So these are some of the things you can do to really understand your data. But even practically, one thing that I would recommend is always look at the mix, okay, of your data. Okay, what I mean by the mix is usually in business there are some segments that you care about. So instead of just looking at the total average, you can look at the average by various segments. I don't mean very basic high level segment, but maybe even more granular. Maybe you have some persona segmentation, or you have some market area segmentation, or you have some product groups, or any segmentation that you have in your business. You can use them to really analyze. Even the mean by segment can reveal something. One of my favorite ways of segmenting the mean and to really understand what is happening in your data is by using deciling approach. So basically, put your data into 10 equal groups by a particular metric, and then profile your average or whatever metric you care about. Profile them by the decile group. Okay, let me show you an example of that. You can see the decile group of about 470,000 customers. Okay, and this is showing the average number of purchases by this group of customers. Okay, and group them from decile 1 to 10. And guess what? Even though the overall average is about 6, meaning that on average the customers in this group make about 6 purchases in a given year. Look at decile 1, they are making 23 purchases, and look at decile 10, they are actually not even making up to 1 purchase in a year. But what does this tell you? It shows you certain information in the data that just looking at the average, which is 6.1 number of purchases, wouldn't give you. You can clearly see here that there are opportunities to improve because the top decile is actually making 22 trips. And so if you want to improve this, you may want to study what is unique about this top decile group, okay? And you want to understand what is unique about this bottom decile group, like from decile 8, decile 9, and decile 10, that are actually spending 1 or less trips, or what I call number of purchases. Okay, anyway, I thought I would just show you this to really help you understand the reason why just looking at the average or the mean of your overall population is not enough. It's okay that executives look at that, but as a data scientist or someone who wants to actually make a lot of sense out of data, you must go beyond the mean and look at what I call the mix of your data, the segments, percentiles, quartiles, averages, measure your standard deviation, plot out your data as a box plot if it's a continuous variable, as we will say, or histogram. Okay, and honestly, the same thing applies when it comes to rates, because in the business you see things like conversion rate, escalation rate, repurchase rates, retention rate. These type of rates are essentially averages, and looking at them by itself is not enough. You actually want to look at them by the mix, or by segments, and very granular segments, so that you can find optimization opportunities. I hope this discussion was very helpful. Let me know your comment and things that you like to understand, and I'll be happy to make new videos on them. Thank you. Bye bye.